let's get into these next two here, Boone, which are kind of a pair. And I will say before we get to this question, I'm going to miss you giving these trade advice, kind of segments here, pal, because let me tell you what, the trade deadline, as you mentioned in the first segment, is coming up here on Saturday. I suck at this portion of fantasy analysis. I'm just not really, I can kind of be, hey, this guy's, he's trending up. I'd like to buy this guy, but then people come with the specific trade questions. I don't know. I'm a terrible fantasy trader. It's something I'm not very good at. So I stink at giving this advice. So I mean this sincerely. I am actually going to miss you talking about this because you're much better at than me, and you've been a good value add to the show.
Well, I appreciate that, but I will also say trades, like anything in fantasy, it's like a game of probabilities, right? Like you're just trying to win more than you lose, and you hope that, 6 out of 10 trades you're going to get the benefit on, and that's going to give you an edge. It's not necessarily that every single one is going to be a slam dunk here. So I'm hoping that the 8 guys that I'm going to mention in terms of buys and sells coming up, that all of these guys come through in the way that I say, but I know that it's probably going to end up being like 6 out of 8, and there'll be a couple that I get wrong, and I'll hear about it from everybody on those players. But let's get to them anyway here. All right, so let's start off. 4 players that I think people should be buying with a couple days left before the trade deadline. And of course, there's some leagues where the trade deadline is going to be a week or 2 away. That's fine too. But this week, a lot of leagues are going to have to deal with it. So the 4 players that I want to mention, I went with 1 at every position: Jared Goff, Kenneth Walker, Chris Olave, and Theo Johnson. For Jared Goff, nothing new on this one. I've talked about the Lions' schedule and how they were going to have to go on the road outdoors against that tough Eagles defense, but that after that, they were going to have 6 straight games indoors, 4 of those taking place back home in the Dome, the friendly confines of Ford Field, where they tend to be more successful on offense, where they tend to put up a lot of fantasy points. I think that's going to happen again here, and I think that's a reason to go out and try to get Jared Goff if you need a quarterback, if you want to try to find that guy who is a QB2, but who the rest of the way could get hot and end up being that low-end to mid-range QB1. We've seen him do it before. Last year, he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback. It would not surprise me at all if he does something like that again the rest of the way. And he's going to get the benefit here of facing the Giants and the Cowboys in 2 of his upcoming 3 outings. They're among the 3 most generous defenses for fantasy quarterbacks. So he gets a couple nice matchups to get that positive momentum going. Very excited about him potentially getting back to what we saw last year. And I would say, I think with Goff and with this Lions offense, you and I have basically nailed it all year long in terms of when and how they were going to produce, some of the struggles they were going to have. I think we're going to be bang on here again, that this is a spot where they're going to finish the season very, very strong. Kenneth Walker. So this is an interesting one.
Let's hear it, buddy. Let's hear it. You're a Kenneth Walker guy.
Another guy who's in the coping corner.
So let's hear it.
I'm really going out on a limb here talking about people who are in the coping corner, maybe breaking all the rules. But I've been looking at Kenneth Walker a bunch this week because I've been trying to find sort of discounted or cheaper running backs that I could pick up, that I could slide into my flex spot, that I could maybe use as an RB2 the rest of the way, who I think could potentially get back to the type of production that I thought that they could have before the season. And there are not a lot of guys in that scenario, right? There's a lot of players who their situation has changed, or they're dealing with injuries, or a lot of things have happened along the way. But Kenneth Walker, there's some signs here pointing to him potentially making his way out of the coping corner and potentially becoming a fantasy asset who you could feel really good about, who could potentially lead you to a fantasy title down the stretch. And the results so far for him, RB24 production on a per game basis. And I was almost surprised that it was RB24. I thought that was actually better than I expected it to be when I looked up the season long numbers. Now that's through the first 10 games. Now we have a chance for him to potentially go out and show that he can be a player that I thought he was going to be before the season here, Harmon. And some of the reasons that I'm excited for him, he just delivered his best fantasy performance. He had 16 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown. He also had 3 catches for 44 yards. He was the RB10 on the week against a pretty difficult Rams defense. So for him to do that in a good matchup, that is definitely a good sign. We also had some quotes coming out from the coaches. His head coach, Mike McDonald, saying, quote, "It just shows you that he's such an explosive player with the ball in his hands, and he knows there's things that he needs to clean up in his game too. He's done a great job in practice doing that, and will continue to do that. I think Ken's showing that he deserves some more opportunities." And Harmon, this is where I tip my hat to you, because you talked about the idea when we put him in the coping corner that maybe as the season goes along, they will start to give him more work. Maybe they were protecting him early in the season, a guy that's gotten hurt in past years. They want to have him healthy when the games matter the most, late in the season and into the playoffs. Could we be seeing that happen here? And it's not that Zach Charbonnet is going to be phased out of the offense, right? It's not going to happen like that at all. But Walker deserves more touches. He's the more explosive player. He's the guy that can help them get through some of these tougher matchups like we saw last week. And his next opponent here, and we're talking about getting some positive momentum going, he's going up against the Titans. It's the friendliest matchup that he has faced all year long. They're giving up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. I think that is going to be the start of him getting on a hot streak and really producing for fantasy in a way that matters the rest of the way. Do you want to comment on that one before I talk about anyone else? Because I think that is a big one in terms of this section.
Oh yeah. And I mean, you're playing my exact music here. This is what I was kind of predicting would happen. I said it on Football 301 before I said it on this show to you that I feel like we're going to get a December to remember with Kenneth Walker here because it just makes sense. He is a guy that has never finished an NFL season. And I think the Seahawks team knew very early on, okay, we're going places. Like this defense is good. The offense is outrageously efficient. The one thing that they haven't done all that well is run the ball. And I think actually now they're reaching a point offensively where they need that counterpunch. They need the run game now to step up because number one, I'm not saying, oh, Sam Darnold turned back into a pumpkin or whatever, but he does have some weaknesses in his game, weaknesses that a great defensive coordinator like Chris Shula, who, by the way, they're going to face again this season. They're going to face the Rams again, and they hope to face them again in the playoffs and win those games. They want to win those games. Part of what they can do is kind of take the load off of Sam Darnold and not expect him to be the most efficient quarterback on a per drop back basis in the NFL if they can get that run game boosted up. And I think the easiest and best path, not saying it's definitely going to happen, but best path to do it would be to have Kenneth Walker add those explosive runs to the mix here. So yeah, to me, it just makes sense, man. Save him until the games really, really matter, both from our standpoint in fantasy and certainly for the Seahawks in the real NFL.
Let's hope it happens because I definitely made some predictions before the season about Kenneth Walker that have been nowhere near coming true. And if he finishes strong, then maybe people will remember it in a positive way. Yeah, we'll be able to look back and go,
let me tell you what, that's true though.
Fantasy titles.
Yes, that is 1,000% what most people will be like, wow, Kenneth Walker was awesome in 2025 if he just finishes the season as like the running back 6 or something.
Exactly. Another guy that I think could finish really hot here is Chris Olave, and this isn't the first time that I've recommended buying him. He's definitely popped up in my buy-sell column multiple times this year. Been getting consistent opportunities, right? And now you have Rashid Shaheed out of the way. Brandon Cooks now gets released this week. Olave already was 5th in overall targets among receivers on the season. So I don't know that he can get that much more volume, but certainly solidifies the type of volume that he's been getting. And thanks to some better stat lines, because he was getting the volume, but wasn't really producing early in the year. More recently, he started to have some better games. He's up to wide receiver 14 in fantasy points per game and half PPR. He just doesn't get the same kind of fanfare that some of the other top wideouts get. And part of that might be the priors that people hold with the injury stuff and the concussion risk. And also just that he's playing for the Saints, right? And they're not a playoff contender. They're not, that exciting of a team when compared to some others. And I think, the fact that he's coming off a bye here, also just another reason that he's out of people's minds. But do not let that discourage you. I would go make an offer for him this week. I think he is locked in as a top 20 fantasy receiver, probably a top 15 fantasy receiver based on the volume that he gets. I think he's a guy that could propel himself into wide receiver 1 status down the stretch here. And then Theo Johnson at tight end. Jackson Dart expected to return to the Giants lineup this week, and that puts Theo Johnson right back in the fantasy tight end 1 conversation. And it's not a knock on Jameis Winston, who got the start last week, but in the games here where we saw Dart out there were 7 games with Dart as the starter. Johnson was a top 10 fantasy tight end in those games on a per game basis. And a lot of it is the injuries to the receiving core. Of course, they got to find somebody to throw to, and he's one of those guys, but they've made him a meaningful piece of that offense. And I think fantasy wise, you might not even have to trade for him because he's available in 41% of fantasy leagues still. So you could potentially go get him off the waiver wire if he's still out there in your league, but somebody that I think you're going to be able to use down the stretch for sure.
I was going to say that's your easiest buy, because for most people out there, you can just go waiver wire, click add right now before this week of games. So you can just go ahead and grab Theo Johnson. I will just echo your point on Chris Olave here. I just think he's really underrated. And I thought this in the offseason when I put out my wide receivers, the top 15 wide receivers, 25 and under. I have some takes on that I regret for sure. But one thing that I just consistent pushback I got from that list was I had Chris Olave way too high. People in the offseason thought Chris Olave like legitimately wasn't good at football. And to me, the pushback was no. This, I'm telling you guys, number one, he's really, really, really good in isolation. He just hasn't stayed healthy, number one, and two, has not played an offense that's well designed other than the little stint with Clint Kubiak last year, but then he started getting banged up. Like that offense that he started out with Pete Carmichael at the helm was archaic. I mean, truly like ancient NFL stuff that is not equipped for today's league. Now we see him in Kellen Moore's offense. In weeks 1 to 5, he was second in the NFL in targets, 40th in receiving yards. In the game since then, it's like completely flipped where he's actually still getting a good amount of targets. He ranks 7th in yards per game. So like the yards have now started to accumulate with the targets. I like the way Tyler Shuck played, 141 air yards against Carolina the game before the bye. More of those downfield looks will make Chris Olave truly like I love that top 15 fantasy receiver. He's definitely somebody, even sentiment wise, I think it's not caught up to the production this year. So really good call out there. Okay, let's get to the next question here and essentially the negative side of what we're doing before the trade deadline.
Yeah, which players should you be selling before the trade deadline? And again, I have 4 here, and we could tie it into what we said earlier about some of the guys that you could consider selling. That this is the one that's very difficult for people to do because you don't want to look foolish. You don't want to trade that player away at this point in the season and have them go to another manager and help them win a title. And yet, I think the 4 names that I picked here, I feel pretty confident that they're not going to do that.
Yeah,
so it's Justin Herbert at quarterback. It's Travis Etienne at running back, Deebo Samuel at receiver, and Jake Ferguson. And you're not trading these guys for huge hauls. You're not getting RB1s and wide receiver ones in return. You're probably packaging these guys with someone else to try to get a player that you have more confidence in down the stretch. And the Herbert one is obvious. It's not his fault by any means. It's all the injuries on that offensive line. It just changes the way that they're going to play. You know, when he returns from the week 12 bye, he does come back to a pretty soft matchup against the Raiders, but he's got dates with the Eagles and the Chiefs and the Texans. He's got all those coming up here for the rest of the way. It's not going to look good, I don't think. When they face teams that have strong defensive fronts, that offensive line does not have anyone coming to save them. The injuries are just going to take a toll here, and it's going to impact Herbert's production. So consider him like a risky low-end QB1, but I honestly think there's a chance he ends up being more of a fantasy QB2 just because of all those injuries and some of those matchups. For Travis Etienne, a lot of things have happened here, right? And he's been good for fantasy this year. He definitely has. I think we got to give him that. And yet last week, we might have seen the start of a change in that backfield. We talked about it on Monday with Bashal Tutin before he got hurt, 15 carries, Travis Etienne's 12. Wasn't necessarily a complete takeover, but maybe a sign that this could become more of a 50-50 type committee. Now today, before we came on here, I saw that Travis Etienne is at practice in a non-contact jersey, that he is limited now. And we have Bashal Tutin looking like he is fine, even though he got dinged up in that game, that he is going to be able to play this week. So that might just be another thing that propels Bashal Tutin into more of a role in this offense. And I think that just takes the top off for Etienne. And there's always the possibility that because this coaching staff isn't tied to him, that we do see them start to give more chances to that rookie that they really like, and a guy that I think is eventually going to be the lead back in this offense, whether that happens down the stretch here or whether that happens next season. I think Tutin definitely has shown enough that he's going to get his chance to be the guy. And if it happens this year, I don't think, even if it's an injury, I don't think he would give the job back. I think if he gets out there into a role where he's the lead back in the offense, he is going to look so good. He's already flashed on his limited opportunities that he would look so good in that role that I think Travis Etienne would lose his job because of it and still be involved, but just be on the lower side of the committee there. So I think that is one that you could look to sell before it's too late. Deebo Samuel, this one's obvious, right? He's been getting by with the touchdown production. He hasn't been great this year. We don't know if and when Jaden Daniels is coming back. We don't know if Terry McLaurin's going to come back and factor in and maybe take some targets away from him and how that could change things for this offense. So Deebo looks like he's lost a step. I think if you could capitalize on the fact that he scored some touchdowns recently, get rid of him, get him off your team. And again, 1 for 1, you might not get a big return, but package him with another starter and try to upgrade somewhere if you can. And then Jake Ferguson, this one's tough because he's had a good season. He is a good player. And yet, since we got those wide receivers healthy, we have Pickens, we got CeeDee Lamb, the numbers have started to decline for Ferguson. And this past week, I mean, it was 16 yards. He just saved it with a touchdown. It's going to be a lot more like that along the way. And you're going to need those touchdowns from him to produce. So I am very worried. I mean, relying on touchdown production is a dangerous game. His next two opponents here, the Eagles and the Chiefs, they're both top 7 in terms of hardest matchups for fantasy tight ends here. At this point in the season, I know most people aren't trading their starting fantasy tight end, but I would look to do it because I think people are viewing him, and we talked about it's all about perception. I think people still view Ferguson as that potential top 5 receiver at top 5 tight end, and I just don't think he's that guy anymore. I don't think he's going to produce like that the rest of the way. And there's a lot of other names at tight end. You look to like the low end tight end 1 type guys that could potentially usurp him, could jump him the rest of the season. So I think you should look at Ferguson as somebody that you might want to get rid of if you can, even though trades at the one-off positions can be tough.
Yeah, if like Theo Johnson's available, maybe you pick him up and see how that goes, and you try to get something for Jake Ferguson to upgrade, somewhere like a 2 for 1 type thing to upgrade, and one of your running backs or wide receivers. I think that's possible. Funny note, because I have a couple Justin Herbert teams, and I'm very nervous about how it's going to go. And they're some of my best teams this year, including a team that I was like, did I pick up somebody for a backup? I did pick up Bryce Young for the bye week this week, but I pulled this team up as we were looking at it. On this team, Justin Herbert's the quarterback. I have Travis Etienne at running back, and I have Jake Ferguson as the starting tight end. And I'm like, oh no. I've got 3 of these guys. Boone's like, you need to trade these fools away. And this team's wide receiver. Yeah. This team's wide receiver 1 was Drake London. So it's a head-to-head and a median league. So you're against the points too. And I'm 3rd. I'm doing well, but I feel like I'm going to fight to the end, but I don't know if I've got the win in me based on this conversation we're having right now.
That team seems a little Chargers-esque, right? Where like you're a good team, but the injuries are mounting, and you start to worry about whether these guys are going to keep producing down the stretch for you. Yeah, for sure.
I also have Marvin Harrison Jr., who just loves seeing that O with the appendicitis. Give me a freaking break, Marvin Harrison. God, unbelievable.
Right, okay, so yeah,
I would say. Right when he was coming on, I would say if I would just order these that I think least to most likely to make you look stupid. I think the least likely to make you look stupid is Deebo. I think that's a good sell. I just think at this point, he's coming off that game against the Dolphins, but I agree with you taking a step back. The offense is questionable. Mariota, Terry McLaurin coming back, the whole deal. I would say maybe Jake Ferguson, just because I agree with you. If this defense, as Nate and I were talking about, goes from 31st to 21st in the league, I don't think they're going to become a great defense, but with some of these additions, they go from being a complete doormat to functional. It's just going to take some of this passing volume away, and I think there's no shot that CeeDee Lamb's losing his slice of the pie. I think there's no shot that George Pickens is losing his slice. I think Ferguson would be the guy to get banged there from a target perspective. I think Herbert probably next in terms of he's just so good. And like we've seen they can put together a game plan to get the ball out fast like they did against the Steelers. And it's not like he was a great fantasy quarterback there, but it was functional. I think it's kind of a tie, honestly, between Ferguson and Herbert. And then the guy that I think could make you look bad is Travis Etienne, just because, and I'm not saying that just because I've got him on this fantasy team and a couple others. I'm not just saying it because of that. But I do think that run game is really coming along, and I actually think there's room for both of these guys to be useful and usable in fantasy, even if Tootin takes a step forward. Just because I think they want to take the air out of the ball at this point. I don't think Liam Cohen fully trusts Trevor Lawrence. They've obviously had their hiccups in the pass game overall. Yeah, I feel like they want to take that air out of the football a little bit. And, there's some games down the stretch where I think I could see Jacksonville just putting it in both backs' bellies over and over and over again. And, that's obviously week 13. Even this matchup against Arizona, but week 13 against the Titans. There's definitely Jets week 15. There's some spots here where they could be running the football a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, Etienne has played really well. And the main change right now that's happening is that there's this young running back who's starting to potentially threaten him. And we'll see what happens with the injury this week. But I'm basing a lot of this on the potential for Bashal Tootin. And it's funny, and this sometimes does inform or impact our opinions. I have a lot of Bashal Tootin on my team. So maybe that's pushing me a little bit in that direction to talk down about Etienne and talk up Tootin here. Because I definitely think that we've seen enough from him that he deserves more opportunities. I wasn't sure that it was going to come because after the Bigsby trade happened, I thought that would be the opportunity for it to come. With a lot of these rookies, it's taken a little bit longer. Now it's potentially going to happen, but I do agree with you that they're going to run the ball as much as they possibly can. That it seems like Liam Cohen has just lost confidence in Trevor Lawrence, and I mean, can you blame him right now, right? There's been a lot of things that have changed in that offense, injuries in the receiving core and stuff. But yeah, Trevor Lawrence just not really looking like the franchise quarterback that franchise thought that they were getting when they drafted him. And now Liam Cohen's trying to figure it out. And Liam Cohen, I have a lot of faith in him that he is going to be able to figure it out. I wonder whether Lawrence is going to be the quarterback long-term there, but that's a conversation probably for the offseason. Right now, just look at it and go, yeah, that backfield is one that could be good for fantasy. I think it's going to lean towards Tootin the rest of the way. I think Etienne could have value, but I think right now you'd be selling him at the peak of his value in my mind based on what he's done so far this season.